1812 overture, mate.
Well, Littleton's just one of those kind of rare little places that you find accidentally.
Playing the first paying gig in there.
Hard-working and a little bit industrial and grimy.
Yeah, mate.
Those are always the places that artists gravitate to, because the rent was cheap at some point.
Is there money in poetry?
No.
Ex-brother-in-law. He asked me once, if you could be anything you wanted to be, what would it be? And I said, well, I'd really like to be an obscure poet. Me, it worked.
I think I was a writer before I was a reader, because for whatever reason I developed a fondness for words. Just the idea that you can throw a bunch of words together and just by the way they sound together, that can make it beautiful.
I believe in ballads, crafted long and lovingly with words, caressing words as lovers touch.
Wrote poems for myself for years and years and years and years until I wound up, I was actually here before I started doing anything kind of serious about it. I think I just enjoyed the fact that people would stop and actually listen. Fishing the swim of the well. It's about growing up in the Motueka Valley. In a lot of ways, it's just about ordinary people. It's about coal miners and farmers and labourers and dreamers and chancers and dudes who never made it. This is the family home. Used to be the family home. We're all ordinary in our extraordinary ways. My parents were tobacco growers. Every farm from probably Tapawera to Motueka had tobacco on it. They both went there as seasonal workers. Mum went there with 60 pounds that her grandmother gave her. Dad went there with a motorbike and 5 quid. And he was an Australian, he was on his way to Canada to see his uncle. The thing that Mum and Dad had in common was their approach to everything was hard work. It was just like hard work. If you're working, you're alive. So I'm out in this paddock one day, and this one here, it's stinking hot, and I'm moping along, and the river's hot, and I'm thinking, oh man, I want to be anywhere but here. And Dad comes up behind me and goes, what are you doing? And I'm like, huh? He says, what are you doing? He says, oh, I'm moaning and grizzling about hand hoeing. And he says, son, anyone can do a job they like doing, but it takes character to do a job you don't like. So have some character, son. The single biggest factor that's going to dictate whether your kids read or not is whether they come out of a reading home. And if they see it modelled. Dad was huge on it. He pushed it, like reading. He had piles of books everywhere in the house. And it's like half the stuff that Dad built for this farm, he learned how to books, So you need to learn how to weld. So read a book, go and learn how to weld. Build all the machinery for the farm. And you need to learn how to build a house, read a book. Mum told stories in a different way. Mum was born 1937 on St Patrick's Day at Awhi on the banks of the Waikato River. She was born in conditions that I can only describe as unimaginable. They lived in rope or huts. Mum had this constant mantra when she was a kid, too many tangies. That's what she remembers about her childhood, too many tangies. And Ma told me about dirt floors, ponga log walls, and smoky fires set in an old oil tin. She told me about lamps that smelt of kerosene and tobacco pipes kept alight with a little ember of coal and healers that cured with karakia who could not even look at Pākehā people for fear of succumbing to Pākehā sickness and Pākehā curses. One of the first questions I was asked was like, how do you, coming from an oral culture, an oral Indigenous culture, how do you reconcile being a reading ambassador with that? And it's like, well, you just redefine what reading is. I think an oral culture way of teaching things is still valid. All of that knowledge, that vast kind of storehouse of knowledge, was all transmitted generation to generation through stories. Mum grew up in the marae and she used to make hats and mats and whatever. Well, we took some leaves off the harakeke bush, and she stripped them out and made me about an 8-foot long bullwhip. But there was two of us doing it, so I was at one end holding it, and she was kirongeki raro, and while she was doing it, she was talking about weaving when she was a little girl, and raranga and the muka and all the traditions that go with this plant. So many metaphors emanate from this plant that are relevant to what the reading ambassador is meant to do. Its official name is Te Awhi Rito, and so Te Awhi Rito is a young juvenile harakeke. That's a rito, that's a young leaf. So the next two leaves are the parents, and they're called matua, and the next two leaves beyond them are called kaumatua, their grandparents, and then all the leaves outside that are called tupuna leaves, so they're ancestors. It's the older generations that look after the younger one. If you arrange yourself as a community like that, then you're pretty hard to shake, you know? The main thing with Te Awhi Rito is to encourage a love of reading in children and young people, and especially reading for pleasure. We're at Ngāti Mahuta School in the Motueka Valley. This is my old school. This is the first time I've been back. I'm probably even more nervous than I was the first day I came here, actually. Good on you. So this used to be room 1, and when I moved into this room, Roger Duncan was the teacher, he was the deputy principal, and he was the strapper. So this was the room where everything got serious. One of the things you do when you're real bored, if you couldn't get him disrupted, is you try and get him to read your story. Man, when he read a story, like he was in the story. The mantra is, boys don't read. It's not that boys don't read, it's that you're giving boys shit that they don't want to read. I really struggled to get into books when I was young. When I was 10, my dad, he was on at me to read this particular book. And he's standing in my doorway and he says, "Have you read it yet?" And I went, "No, I'm not going to read your stupid book." And he threw it at me. He had it in his hand, he threw it at me. And it's a big hardcover book, and he just said, "Read it." So I read it. I remember the first lines of it. And it has an accent that goes with it to put you in place. And it just goes, "Tom, no answer. Tom, no answer. Tom, what's going with that boy? No answer." That's how it starts. And it's the Adventures of Tom Sawyer. And I love that book because it's about this ratbag kid who lives on a river, builds rafts, skives off school, just has fun with his mates. And I'm thinking, that's my life.
Were you a bit of a wild child?
I liked putting myself in danger. I was predisposed to challenge every kind of good thing put in front of me. And just, you know, don't go up there, I'll go up there.
On behalf of Ngāti Mahuta School, we'd like to thank you for coming out here and telling us the stories about your life.
Thank you, bro. Awesome. For a long time, I kind of didn't take myself that seriously. Like when I was younger, smack myself around a bit, get yourself in some really stupid situations, which you don't realise you're carrying scars for a long time. For myself, I reached a point in my career where somehow really good things were still happening. And yet, on the other side of things, I was just spiralling into this kind of dark hole full of alcohol and drugs and a whole bunch of other things. And then you suddenly reach a point where, okay, one of these two things has to go, or they're both going to collapse. And yes, I did. I put myself into a rehab system, which took 5 or 6 goes at before I kind of got it right. The bridge is just down the road from the farm. The river there is deep and quiet, a slow-moving pool. Stanley and I were walking home from school one day. Stanley stopped halfway across the bridge and climbed up onto the railings to have a look over the side. "Hey bro," he said, "you ever jump off here?" "Nah, not yet," I said. "One day though." Jumping off the bridge was one of those things you had to do around here. It was a rite of passage. It was like the end of one part of your life and the start of another. "Today, bro," said Stanley. And I jumped. Of course I jumped. I jumped like a freed animal. I was a fish in the swim of the world.